Okay, welcome to Firefighting Today, the weekly roundtable show where we discuss all sorts of things fire service related. My name is Peter Lamb. I'm the host. We'll do a panel introduction. Tonight we're going to talk about standards, firefighter standards, and are they relevant? Are they keeping up with the new information? Are they helping us in our day-to-day management of the department? We encourage you, if you're watching live on YouTube, you can feel free to leave a YouTube comment and you can interact with the panel that way. And if you happen to be live tweeting tonight, you could be using the hashtag FFT, Firefighting Today Standards. So if you're using that, actually if you're using it on Google+, we should be able to pick that up as well as a Google Plus hashtag. So either on Twitter or Google+, or you can actually leave us a YouTube comment. So let's get back to what we're doing here. All right, good. My name is Peter Lamb. I'm the author of PeteLamb.com. I am the host of the Firefighter Training Podcast. We'll introduce the panel starting with Adam. Adam, say hello, brief introduction.
Hey guys, Adam Gannoy, Kellogg, Iowa with the Kellogg Fire Department. I'm a captain.
Excellent. Thanks for being here, Adam. Ethan, say hello.
Hi, Pete. Ethan Bansek from Lorain, Ohio, student of the trade and founder of Passed On Fire Training.
Okay, good stuff. John, say hello.
Good evening, gentlemen. John Haywick, Lieutenant, City of Passaic Fire Department in New Jersey.
Okay, and John does not have video capability with us tonight, so you'll see the icon. That's not a technical problem. That's by design. Greg, say hello.
Good evening, everybody. Greg Howard from the Dashwood Fire Department out on Vancouver Island in Canada.
Excellent. Thanks for being here, Greg. I appreciate it. It's always a strain for Greg. It's, 3 hours earlier out there, so I appreciate him taking the time. Joe, say hello.
Good evening, gentlemen. Joe Starnes, Oak Grove Volunteer Fire Department and project manager for Project Kill the Flashover.
Excellent, excellent. And Rob, say hello.
Good evening. Happy New Year, everybody. Rob Fling. I'm Chief of Dick Sills Fire Department, Long Island, New York, and also the founder and president of Face Peace On. And I'm actually getting a chest pain run up the street for me. I will be back in approximately 10 minutes.
All right. Take care.
Okay.
Let me just silence that for a minute. Warren, say hello.
Good evening, folks. Warren Whitley, retired Assistant Chief of Prince William County, Virginia, Department of Fire and Rescue.
All right. Thank you, Warren. So our topic here tonight is, we're talking about standards, and some of this derived, and I'll let Warren talk about it. There was kind of an interaction on social media, and Warren is sort of kind of like I am in some cases. You watch these discussions go by, and sometimes you jump in, sometimes you don't. But the discussion was relative to standards, and I'll just kind of turn it over to Warren. Warren, what was the nature of the discussion that brought us to this conversation tonight? We're going to take it a little bit differently than the discussion you watched, but what was the nature of that, if you don't mind?
Gee, now you're asking the old guy to remember something from more than a week ago. I don't remember exactly what it was. I'm sure it dealt with fire behavior.
Yeah, didn't it have something to do with the fact that, what you learned and how much time is spent on teaching fire behavior versus what it should be and what the curriculum is saying and so forth? Wasn't it something in that line?
Most likely, because those are the only ones I jump in on. Regularity. NFPA still is only requiring or proposing 4 hours of fire training or fire behavior-based training for the entire range of firefighter certification. So from firefighter 1 to officer 4, you're required 4 hours of fire behavior. To me, that's a crime because it's basically, now we have a negligence to train our firefighters to know what to do and how to identify fire behavior that they'll actually see out in the field. Hand in hand with that is the we're hamstrung by 1403 as far as live fire burns and the fuel loads we can use. And none of that stuff approaches the heat release rates or anything we really see out in an actual structure. That's kind of where my heartburn is in some of these standards. The other thing is the length of time it takes to get anything new put in a standard, or changes made. There have been some inroads made. Ed Harton was able to get a few extra pages into the ISTA manual this past edition for additional fire behavior information. But we're lagging far behind what Europe has and what they teach their students. And Joe and I working on KTF, me helping him out, is the authority having jurisdiction has a lot of latitude, but nobody's willing to take it because of the perceived liability, because of the standard of care they see these standards as setting. So is that good enough of a tee it up for you?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great intro, and I appreciate that. And we're also joined by Captain Joe. Captain Joe Pernesti is with us tonight, so we didn't get to introduce him, but we'll get to some discussion on the panel. I think there's two good ones there that we can start with, and there's some other places we can go besides that. But let me ask the question, John, in the City Fire Academy, what was your training like for fire behavior? How much classroom time, and was there a practical portion or not, if you don't mind me asking, John?
Going back about 15 years, we did an in-house fire academy. So we did a lot of hands-on. We actually have a burn tower in the rear of our building, so we had a Class A tower out there. And our introduction was an old-time chief that would bring us in, start a nice hay and paper fire, and get it going, and see how long we could last with talking about fire behavior and showing us and seeing what we could withstand as we get lower and lower and lower to the ground. So that was probably one of the best introductions of fire behavior that I've seen. But that's what we did in the City Academy. Plus, we did obviously stuff within the classroom, videos. We had a little bit more because my class was only eight firefighters deep at the time, so we had more one-on-one with everybody.
Right. All right, Greg, certification in Vancouver, what in British Columbia, what kind of training, classroom piece versus the practical piece, just to get a flavor for what's going on?
Yeah, the BC Office of the Fire Commission recommends that volunteer or paid keep 1001 level 2 standard for interior fire attack, and it just recently changed. I think I sent you a copy, possibly to Joe, the playbook standard. Did I send you that? So they're now looking at in the past we had a rural fire department standard that was basically defensive operations only, and now they're looking at. They realized that a lot of departments weren't meeting the 1001 standard and the staffing requirements for 1720. So they're looking at an in-between, a stopgap, which would be keep the fire from spreading next door, based on the resources that the departments have.
Right. Okay, Joe, in your part of the world, what is the training academy like for fire behavior? What are you doing for fire behavior? Captain Joe, I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, in Ohio, it's 240 hours for firefighter, and then of that, only 3 hours. And I teach fire behavior and fire attack at a fire academy near me. Used to be 6 hours, but they cut it to 3.
Okay. And just from my previous life experience at the Mass Academy, we would have a 3-hour lecture and then about a half a day in the burn building. Similar situation, showing fire growth, those kinds of things. So probably out of a 496-hour career recruit academy, you had about 6 hours of fire behavior. And that was all, so that's part one. So I think we're all saying the same thing that Warren picked up on, is that the number is fairly low, and it varies. It certainly varies from all across the board. So that's certainly a situation. Now, what about the fuels we're using? Listen, I think we all understand that 1403 was based, the live burn standard was based on some tragedies early in the 80s, particularly the Boulder, Colorado, I think is the one that drove this thing. probably at great lengths. I think we understand the need for the standard. What's the opinion of the board? Do you think that we need to change this? And I'm not talking about the authority having jurisdiction just now. I want to just get an opinion. Do you think that we need to change 1403 in some way? Does anybody have any opinions on that one way or the other?
I do.
Go ahead.
Yes, unequivocally yes, because we're missing the boat entirely on showing students what they're actually going to see out in the field. 3 pallets and a bale of straw with such a low heat release rate, I mean, it's mostly smoke when you get down to it. We're setting them up for failure in an actual structure because they're learning behaviors and attack methods based on low heat, visibility. If they're not using a thermal imaging cameras or tools to help them get through the building itself is non-combustible, so it's not contributing to any more fuel by pyrolysis from the hot gases in the overhead. So, in some places still teach them to go into the room before they put that fire out, which is completely, with high heat release fuels, that's a no-win situation there. So I think we're setting them up for fail because the training is not realistic in the least. And a lot of them get surprised in a bad way when they go on their first run and the heat's pounded them down to the floor because nobody's taught them how to read the fire for one thing and then what to do about it to make it safe for entry.
No, I think you're exactly right. I think that we are fooling our folks, and I think you really hit on clearly a nerve point, and that is making entry into the room. I know that our curriculum in Mass, you definitely made entry into that room before you did anything about it, and we know that that's clearly not the way people are leaning right at this point in time. So I think that does make a difference. I think that is important. Joe Steins, why don't you dive into this discussion? You might have 1 or 2 things to say about this.
Of course. Just to kind of reinforce Chief Whitley's comments, we've done a lot with burning in the last 5 years is associated with what types of fuels we burn and how we burn them and what's safe to burn and how. One of the reasons they're not safe is they're very ill managed, in my opinion. The way we do fire control burns under 1403 is just an easy way for the system to say you've had a fire training and you've not had much danger. Well, I don't know how you train for a dangerous job and not have danger. And I'm not talking about instituting danger. I'm talking about the danger that comes with the fire science. I think one of the things we've done in the last while, and you've been a part of this, Chief Lamb, you remember, and Chief Whitley both, is when we did a burn with certified firefighters with high release rate fuels, and we put a lot of cameras and we showed probationary firefighters that burn. We showed them the behaviors of the fire. Even that was lightly loaded. That's not what they're going to experience in the field. I just don't think we've sat down and said what we need to say about how to train firefighters. The other piece that's never talked about is there ought to be continuing education for certified firefighters. There ought to be live burns for certified firefighters in continuing education. We shouldn't be able, the old saying is, the fire I trained for in 1977, is that the fire I would go to today? It's not. It's not even close. And we've got a lot to talk about in this subject. And we've got a lot of things we would have to do. We'd have to spend some money. We'd have to understand the science better. And we are also going to create a new way to learn so that we're updating as we go, not just updating when somebody gets upset.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that. So what do? I'm a chief. I'm in a small department. We got Adam from a small rural department. We got John from a city department. What's my liability if I run a burn according to NFPA 1403, but I don't comply with the fuel requirement? In other words, I don't follow the fuel requirement. What is the real fear? The fear is liability, right? I'm not following a minimal consensus standard. So there is my liability. So do I err on the side of firefighter safety, which I think, I get strong opinions on what we should be doing here. There was a comment in the chat room talking about, are we setting our firefighters up for a safety hazard? Are we putting people in trouble because they've gone to this, 4 pallets and two bales of hay? That's the fire they think they're going to see when they show up with a room full of stuffed furniture and so forth. So, I don't know.
I got one comment to that, and it's in the chat room too.
I don't believe you have just one. Let me say that I don't believe you have just one, but go ahead.
If you don't hear over a 3-second pause, it's one comment. One of the things that happens is, of course, it's always liability, and the cities, towns, governments, authority having jurisdiction are all worried about that. And they're what I call afraid of the red-faced test. Somebody's going to get on the stand and tell them just how unsmart they were that day that somebody got hurt. One of the things that we have to do is the accreditation is mentioned in the chat room by Captain Joe. The bottom line is there is fear that they can't do it any other way. There's not acceptance of saying that's wrong. The piece of that is why would you take that risk? You'd rather the firefighter risk their life than the system take the risk of the liability. I think that's foolishness. I think someday somebody's going to sue us or sue the system or sue the authority have jurisdiction that their loved one got injured or killed simply because we didn't prepare them and we knew better. You want a liability? I think that's the next liability on the horizon.
So say that again, Joe. So you're saying because I'm an academy or I'm a certified instructor and I had the means to train somebody to a better way or a better level, and I didn't do that, you're thinking that could be a liability?
Well, the negligence of that, Chief, wouldn't it be in the court of law? Wouldn't the negligence be you knew better and you didn't? You knew about fire behavior and you knew about flashover and you didn't prepare the student for that behavior? Why wouldn't that be just as easy to prove as some of the other things we take to court? I think liability runs 2 ways. I just don't think we've experienced the liability on the other side.
Okay, fair enough. Let me just refer to. I want to talk to Greg a little bit about instructor liability. Have there been any cases, anything Canadian concerning instructor liability? I think we had we discussed the one about the salt shed, right? Wasn't there? They decided to do a drill on a. I'm trying to think of the name, the town.
That was Whitehorse.
Yeah, Whitehorse.
So they decided to put an actual call under the training. So that was. I don't know whether it applies to training so much.
Right, because it was a genuine response to begin with, and then they converted it into training. Yeah. Tell me your thought. What is the likelihood of what is the liability culture, if you will, in your part of the world versus what we have? I mean, no United States fire. I think we've taken one incident commander on a wildfire incident to task, but I don't think we've done anything else in the United States so far. So, what's the culture there, Greg?
Well, I'm unaware of any civil liability from a training bill. In the case of Whitehorse, there was liability for a few of the officers involved, starting from the top. Most of the stuff I've read, unfortunately, we don't have NIOSH reports for Canada, so we used. I used the NIOSH reports for training my guys because we don't separate the firefighter injuries and line of duty deaths from other services in Canada in the way that they track. So it's much harder to follow up on that.
Okay. We're starting to see some discussion take place in the chat room. I have an opinion on this, and I'll weigh in last. I was going to say, well, see, Warren is jumping in right now. Be it Shane, we didn't introduce Shane. Shane's with us. Shane, talk a little bit about you. You are thinking the Flashover simulator, the Flashover can, as we call it, is a valuable tool. Tell us what your thoughts are on that.
Well, welcome everybody. It's been a while since I've been on the board panel. Thanks for having me again tonight. My first fire department was a volunteer fire department in the suburb of Denver, Colorado, and they had a flashover unit in early '90. I had no idea what it was when I went through my first academy, and it wasn't until years later that I truly began to understand the importance of what that unit taught me as a first-time firefighter. And recently, I've been doing a lot of the research on fire behavior and these advanced things being put out by the NIST and the UL. And as a flashover instructor now, I've really started to pay attention to that flashover unit when used properly, as has been alluded to in the discussions. It does a great job of showing you the effects of ventilation limited versus fuel limited fires, and they're perfect for showing firefighters what happens when you just shut the unit down. Even though those things aren't airtight, you close the doors on them and everything, the heat goes away, the fire goes away, it starts to die, it starts to kill itself. And you don't develop the flash until you open the door and allow the air to be introduced into the superheated environment. And everything that NIST has been talking about and everything that the general fire population seems to be pushing back against on the NIST and the UL studies can all be demonstrated every time, over and over again, every time you use a flashover trainer, if you've got access to one.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think I think you said a couple of key words, and a couple of the adjectives mean as much as anything else, if used properly and correctly. Because there was a time early on when flashover chambers were being used, and it was the PPE testing machine to see if you could melt your gear and whatever. I think that's something else that's there entirely. Captain Joe, your comment about, what about flashover? What about not being in space? Do you want to talk about that to begin with?
Well, one of the, I don't want to call it an argument at my academy or a discussion. My particular academy I teach at just put in a multi-million-dollar burn building, one of the probably the best in Ohio. And one of the things, though, is it's built so strongly and so stout that you have to get into the room to open up to put the fire out. And we've been experimenting and trying to get it to where, you know what, in the real world, you're going to hit it with the reach of the stream. And I am so worried that I was involved in a Mayday few years back where the crew waited till they saw fire. And it lit up behind them because it heated up and they couldn't see the fire. Well, we can't let a kid graduate from an academy with that thinking, or thinking I'm just going to go right up to the room and open up. It's not real world.
Right. I don't disagree with that. Adam, what's going on? Do you have flashover simulators out there? What's your ability to do live training on a regular basis? How does that work for you, Adam, in your rural setting?
I haven't seen a simulator for flashover. The State Bureau does have a burn trailer, which you can do above and below grade fire attacks. You can get that scheduled if you get enough people. It is free to the department. They're also getting a new one this year. I'm not sure what the capabilities of it's going to be.
All right, good. I recall in an older edition, and excuse my gray hair here, but in an older edition of 1500, where the actual recommendation was that you do live burns on a quarterly basis. And I think that's still part of the standard, and I just don't think that we're doing that, and I'm not sure how this standards that we have address it. The other thing that Warren and I talked about offline a little bit is now you throw, not that it's a standards-making organization. We've mentioned NFPA, and I certainly don't want anybody watching this video to think I'm bashing the NFPA. The rules, the standards-making process is open to anyone. if you have strong feelings about it, get on the standards committee and get involved in the process. There is a process to change the standards. A lot of people do get concerned about the standards making process. The accreditation process, whether you're a pro board certification agency, whether you're an IFSAC certification agency, they have another part to play in this, and I think that's something that's something else that's got to be taken into consideration. Comment from the audience. We have Ryan. Ryan is here from Jump Seat Views. This can be a false sense of security to young firefighters. The instructors fail the students in the explanations and door control. Yeah, I don't disagree there. I think you're right, Ryan. That's Joe. I think it's time for your discussion about. You've heard of freelancing in the fire department, Joe. Is there some freelancing that we ought to be concerned about that doesn't have to do with the fire ground?
Yeah, Chief, you and I have discussed quite a bit about the instructor freelancing. I make it a habit to attend classes, not as an evaluator, but I just make it a habit to show up and attend classes in various departments and various instructors. And what you see is people, what I call freelancing. They take a PowerPoint presentation and then they give their interpretation of their experiences with that particular principle they're trying to teach. Often that freelancing is often not well founded and not well supported by any research you can find. And then the firefighters leave that room with that impression. That's a dangerous thing. That's a real dangerous thing. I've seen quite a bit of that.
Yeah, I think that it happens, and I think that what's happening now, I have seen a preponderance of this, quite frankly. It's scary that people are taking a lot of this fire behavior research right now, and with very little study, we've got people out there talking about it, and we're not quite certain what we're doing yet. There are very few experts in my mind on that particular subject matter right at the moment, but we have a whole lot of discussion taking place. I want to get to a comment that Joe made. Joe pushed one of my hot buttons, which in a positive way, Captain Joe. But I do want to tell the folks listening, we got a bunch of folks listening, a bunch of viewers tonight, which is great. If you are watching us, feel free to leave a YouTube comment to interact with the panel. If you want to use a Google hashtag of FFT, Firefighting Today Standards, or if you want to use a Twitter hashtag, feel free to do that. We should be able to track those comments. So we're talking about the 1001 standard, firefighter level 1 and 2. We're talking about 1403, and Captain Joe makes a comment and says, why is it some of the fire service gets concerned about that standard and not some others? So, Captain Joe, would you want to expand on that a little bit?
Well, every time a firefighter dies in a line of duty death, the NIOSH reports talk about the NFPA standards that are recommended. Well, this is just another one. But, and we get all worked up about this one standard of live burn. And I don't mean that in a negative way. But, boy, if we were to have the same kind of discipline or the same kind of hammer with these other NFPA standards, man, we'd be a lot better as a service. But it just seems like this is the one standard that no matter whether you've adopted all of them or what, that, oh, no, you can't do it. NFPA, whatever the standard is, it escapes me right now, I'm sorry, but you can't do it. You just can't do it. 1403 or whatever it is, that you can't follow it. Well, or you have to follow it. That to me just doesn't make sense, that we're hammering that one standard over and over again and not the others. Not 1500, not safety officer. How many fires have we all been to where we should have had somebody watching the seaside or a safety officer, something bad happened, we didn't push and yell and scream about it. We just went to the next fire.
Right. There's a couple of comments. Warren's got a good one, and I'll ask Warren to expand on it because I think it's valid. I was watching the chat room, and John had a comment about whether the standard is adopted or not. So Warren, you want to talk about that from a real liability standpoint? Many years ago, I want to say it was like 87 or 88, the state of Rhode Island actually passed. Now here's some discussion for you. I think the statute of limitations has run out on this, but the state of Rhode Island actually passed NFPA 1500 as a state law with 3 exceptions. We threw out training, medical evaluations, and one other piece, and I forget what it was. So we're going to adopt the NFPA standard exactly as it is, except these 3 pieces. So it was really kind of interesting. It may have been staffing, John. Good point. It may have been that. So Warren, what's the deal? Even if I don't adopt it, what's going to happen to me in a court of law? How's that going to play out?
Well, the lawyers are going to look around and see what is out there that presents a standard of care across the fire service in the country. So obviously, NFPA is going to rise to the top of that list, and that's what they're going to hold you accountable. Your actions are going to be measured against those standards and what is the accepted practices of the fire service. So whether you adopt them or not, you're kind of on the hook for complying with them unless you can articulate very well why the authority having jurisdiction deviated and what was their risk assessment for that deviation.
Yeah, and you know what? I think that really needs to be discussed a little bit, and that is the authority having jurisdiction can deviate from the standard if you have a plan. If you have a plan and you have addressed it, and you're going to have all your I's, all your I's dotted and T's crossed. You think it's easy for me to say that. I's dotted and T's crossed. And if you have a reasonable plan, I think that will be there. Rob, you want to talk about that? You were talking about a case history? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was reading a court transcription of a lawsuit yesterday, and the prosecuting attorney, we'll call him, led the person right down the alley with some leading questions and then slammed them with the NFPA stuff. And was it a big deal? No. But if you're on a jury or you're the judge sitting there, now all of a sudden you start thinking, because I'm sure they're not familiar with any of this. I'm sure they're not familiar that, it's a guideline. You can deviate from this if needed, but, no doubt that this hurt the case. Possibly the defense attorney, the attorney that was representing the fire service member, should have had a good knowledge on this and should have maybe done a little more homework if he's not familiar with this, and should have been able to counter this quickly. Reading it, I didn't hear it. I wasn't there. I was just reading the transcript. But it got out of hand, and it backed the firefighter in the corner.
Well, I think it becomes, particularly when you talk about career departments, and somebody in the chat room mentioned staffing in a different context, but when we talk about staffing, whether it's the volunteer department under 1720 or 1710 on the career side, we pick us, wave that standard around like it's the Holy Bible. We waive that standard because we say we need more staffing, we want to meet this requirement. And one of the challenges I've often had is that as an administrator, you can't pick them and choose them. If you're going to follow NFPA standards, you're going to follow NFPA standards. If I want to reduce the audience tonight, if I want to reduce it considerably, if firefighters are concerned about following NFPA standards, then at the first of the year on January 4th, go to your doctor, get a medical physical that meets NFPA 1582, and maybe we won't be having 40% heart attacks anymore. If we want to throw standards around, there's one we could toss around just for the sake of argument. But we do occasionally pick and choose the standards, so I think that's true. Joe, Joe Steins, you had a good comment there concerning how ISO varies from volunteer staffing models. You want to talk about ISO versus 1720 just a little bit?
Well, I'm probably not the right qualified person to do it, but when we were working on the ISO rating for the volunteer system, 1720 and the insurance rating standards do not agree with each other. So you can meet one and not meet the other. They're two different worlds. What we have done is simply write our standard as it relates to our response, so that the test that we go to court with will be against that standard first. Did we train against it? Did we manage it? Did we discipline against it? Did we do the things we said? And then that standard gets compared to what I call the reasonable man test. It'll get compared against the standards that are in the industry. And I think the problem is we mistreat what standards are supposed to do for us. Standards are written for minimum operation, not maximum. They're written to make sure we make minimums. If we don't, then we are held to some reasonable person test that says, why didn't we? And what is the negligence of doing that?
Right. Captain Joe, you had a flip side of the argument on academies?
Yeah, I don't know. I'd like to ask you guys what your academies are like. But the academy that I teach at, and in Ohio, cities don't hire a lot of guys off the streets and then send them to the academy. They don't have that kind of money. So they look for firefighters or new firefighters that have the academy training. So most of the recruits at my academy are not what we call attached. They're 18, 19, 20-year-olds. And one of the things that maybe we can think about here as a flip side is that are pallets and straw a good way to begin them out? Are we confusing a kid that's attached, already riding an engine company, or has already taken the oath and is in an academy, or a kid like Ethan who's going to be a firefighter, probably be a chief someday, who will go to an academy and needs the very basics? And I guess that's the flip side, because that would be the argument of maybe not having, putting couches and beds and burning and having real live fire, that these kids need to start off the basics, they graduate, then they go on to a fire department, and it's up to that fire department to give them that training. That's my flip side.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, certainly the training has to be stepped or staged or gradual. I think that's obviously part of the puzzle. But I think that that's the point. Firefighter 1 gets this. Firefighter 2 gets this, right? We have standards that have said there are different levels. As Warren pointed out, if you want to talk about some challenges, if you're a firefighter 1-2, you've got to do certain things. You got to wear an air pack. You got to demonstrate an air pack. You got to do all these tactile skills. How many of your training academies, when we get to fire officer 1 and 2, have any practical skills that the fire officer has to? Is there a checkoff sheet for manual skills for fire officer? And I would ask you to think about that as you did that, because in our certification program, and we were pro board certified as an academy, there were no practical skills for a fire officer 1 and 2. So that's does he have to know how to, prepare a budget? Does he does he have to actually perform a personnel evaluation before he gets this certification? So I agree with you, Joe, that the process has to be staged, meaning that you can't put the brand new kid into a room and contents fire. I think that's true. I agree with you, but I think certainly that there's got to be a way to graduate him to a point that before we turn him loose in an engine company, before we turn them loose in an engine company, there's got to be some practical standard. Rob, you missed a little bit of the discussion. Where are you on how much fire behavior gets taught in, where were you, Nassau County? Suffolk, I'm sorry. I confused the two. I apologize. But Suffolk County Academy, how much time is spent on fire behavior, and is there a practical piece? Excuse me.
As far as what? As far as attending Firefighter 1?
Well, so you're in Firefighter 1, 2. How much of that time is spent on fire behavior? Just fire science, whatever you call it in your curriculum.
Not a whole hell of a lot,
Right.
to be honest with you. There is hands-on portion of the classes. See, the Fire Academy out where we go is the Suffolk Fire Academy in Yaphank. So you go out there for your Firefighter 1, your Firefighter 2, your Introduction to Fire Officer, all your classes. But most of the departments in Suffolk County also go out there as a department for field trainings. They have the Class A, the taxpayer, the propane, all of that. And basically in the Class A and in the taxpayer is after the drill, it's part of the critique, the instructors will start to get into a little of the fire behavior and explaining what you were seeing when you were going through the evolution, what you did right, what you didn't do right, what you want to look for, why you should be using your thermal imaging camera. They explain it along the lines of that. Personally, I've taken modern fire behavior classes that I've gotten 100% more education out of than any of the classes that I take, on an academy level.
Okay. Yeah, I think some of them, and I think that was what Warren was alluding to early on, is the currency, and I don't mean money currency. Is it current? How fast can we move? For us to change things for the Pro Board or IFSAC, to change the way the accreditation is for Firefighter 1, 2, that's going to be a big deal. Look at how long it's taking to change the textbooks. Even the challenges in the textbooks. I'd like to hear from Shane. Shane, you took Firefighter 1, 2. Did you go through the Department of Defense stuff, or did you have it when you got on?
Well, all right. I got Firefighter 1 and 2 through my first fire academy in the suburb of Denver, Colorado. But then when you go into the DOD, it doesn't matter. You start from scratch, and they send you through a 13-and-a-half-week academy that takes you through CPR and first aid, into Firefighter 1 and 2, airport firefighting, hazardous materials operations, aircraft firefighting vehicle familiarization, and then some stuff on deployment issues. So the deployment one's only about a 2-day class, so roughly 13 weeks of going through everything to get your 1001. And you come out IFSAC certified to the Firefighter 2 hazmat ops and first responder, EMS first responder.
Okay, good. Just a little technical note here, and just a little word for anybody. Shane, can you just swing your camera over just a little bit so I cannot see that TV? Just in case you folks realize, anything playing in the background is subject to a copyright violation, believe it or not. So, no problem. As long as we correct it, I think we're okay, but it is just something weird. Even music in the background. I just heard a horrible thing. We'll talk about it after we get offline, but I just heard the craziest thing about a Google snag on that. So, where do we go? So what is this panel? We've got people watching. We've got some viewers. We've got some people that are going to watch this later on. What does the panel think that we should do? We got about 15 minutes or so to wrap this up. Adam, what are you going to do with this discussion? I mean, you got limited resources. What do you think you should be doing differently after talking about this tonight?
I think we need to be really, not in my department, we don't throw a lot of the NFPA stuff around, but I think we really need to talk a little bit more about the NFPA. This one that we're talking, this 1403. Me and the chief had discussed a little bit about it. We got a house that's next to me that the homeowner actually wants burnt, but in order for us to do that, they have we got to actually file the DNR ruling here in Iowa, which is getting asbestos check and stuff like that. And if the homeowner wants it done, then we leave it up to them to get it removed. But we've talked a little bit about the 1403. Not a whole lot, but I think we need to talk more about it.
Yeah, and just remember to the folks listening, there's a lot of discussion about NFPA tonight, and again, I just want to reiterate, anyone can read all of the NFPA standards. It just takes an email and you can log in. You cannot print them, but you can go to nfpa.org, you give them an email so they make sure it's a real person and not a bot, and you are able to read any of these standards in detail, but you cannot print and you cannot search the argument, the document from there. So that is something that you should be able to do. And we're going to run the panel, but I got another audience response here from John. John is a new member. We're getting John hooked up. We'll get him on the panel here eventually. Who are we fooling as instructors? We're all in agreement. The problem is we've allowed desk commandos to dictate and direct a substandard method to train firefighters on live fire. We have handicapped the ability to truly show the recruits, candidates, what fire behavior really is. You can't see this whole comment, but I'll finish it. I'm all for the safety end of this issue, and believe me, I know what being burned feels like. There is a better method to replicate the conditions that we experience. So John is a very experienced firefighter friend of mine, and he is pretty much agreeing with some of what we're saying in terms of we might be doing a disservice to the firefighters. Captain Joe, what do we do about it? We had this discussion tonight. What do we do about it?
Well, I think right now, we can lobby and do all that sort of thing. And I think in the future, I think in the next 5 years, there'll be a change with live fire. I believe that. But in the meantime, I agree with what the brother said that you just showed, that the desktop commandos or whatever, I think the video and the internet is great. But again, if it's used improperly, we're in a world of hurt. I think the best thing we can each do is when we look at a video and we see an unusual event or smoke lighting off, we need to take it upon ourselves to show that video to a younger firefighter or a crews and say, this is what, we have to explain it the best we can. And everybody on this panel, I believe, is smart enough and well-educated enough to do that. We can only control ourselves and what we run in our fire stations and not the entire country. We got to do the best we can.
Yep. No, I agree. John Hayworth, you've been somewhat quiet. John, what do you think as you summarize here in the discussion tonight?
Like we were alluding to in some of the side messages within the group, standards are the standards. You're going to be held to them one way or the other legally if something goes down. And this is, I was pointing out, this is where large payouts come about from injuries and deaths because people have let these rules go or been bypassed by the administration or the AHJ. 1403, I definitely see changes coming about. You have to. We're setting our people up for failure. Again, we got to walk before we can run. Start out with the paper and hay and the pallets for the Fire 1 students and graduate them up higher. Using the Flashover can is a great tool, showing them what Flashover is, pre-Flashover, and how we can limit smoke and fire spread just through ventilation. I do believe that 1403 should be changing in the next couple of years.
Yeah, and just so we're all familiar, right, the standard is on a 5-year cycle, right? These standards change every 5 years. I don't know where 1403 is in its life cycle right at the moment, but I wouldn't disagree that probably within, I wouldn't say next 5, but in the next life cycle of NFPA 1403, I agree. I think there probably will be changes. Greg, what do you think about the discussion we've had here tonight? What are your thoughts?
I think there's some great things coming up in the group chat there. And we've heard it before from Joe, and Shane was just talking about it. There's no one-size-fit-all standard for the fire departments across North America. The staffing models are different, the experience levels are different, the equipments are different. But there does need to be a minimum standard. And I know for me, I follow the NFPA standard absolutely as much as I can in delivering training and service because, frankly, I don't have the call volume where I have the experience to. These guys have learned it the hard way. I need to read the standard and apply it as best I can.
Okay. Joe Steins, what are you thinking as we begin to summarize here? That comment was a good one to put the ball on the tee for you about your standards, how you feel about standards. But what do? We don't want to trash the NFPA. It does exist as a minimum standard. What do you think as we summarize?
I agree with that. There's a lot of great comments in this chat room, and for those who are throwing compliments around, thank you for those compliments. But the bottom line is this. We're all a colony of ants. I call us. All of us take something to the party every day. I think the power lies in the local jurisdiction. I think that's where we got to be. If a fire chief sets up and says, we've got to do better with this, you will do better. You will do better. You'll eventually do better. You'll teach your recruits better. You'll make your fire service a safer place. I think the power is there, and I think we've got to quit leaning on what I call the Hollywood version of the fire department. We've got to start making our department the best department it can be, the safest, the smartest department it can be, and that's where I'm at. I told someone this week, I said, if you go to a house fire and Mr. Smith's got his garden hose and he's crawling up in the back of his porch, put water on his washer dryer that's on fire, and then we get there as a department and we do the same thing without any logic or dealing with fire science, then I would ask you who was the professional in the firefight. There was one that dressed better than the other, but not necessarily the professional. You can do it at home. These are minimum standards. We should look at them. We shouldn't throw them away. We ought to pay attention to things where we've done things stupid and they've hurt us, and we ought to lobby not to fear training our people the right way. We ought to lobby and doing it in the way that will make them the professional firefighter who can deal with the hazard in a really professional way. And I'm sorry, that was longer than 3 minutes.
All right, but we'll give it to you. I didn't even put up the red sign or the yellow sign, so you're good. You're good. Rob Fling, what do you think about our discussion tonight? What do you take away from it?
Well, I agree with so much of it that was said, and I agree with so much that's in the comment bar. I think 1403 is going to definitely change. I think 1403 needs to change. I think it is. It does lead people, especially the newer members, down a rather false road, we'll say. Hay and pallet, somebody's crawling in. They have very little fire experience. They're like, geez, you know what? I can handle this. This is a piece of cake. And when they go on their first real job and it's chasing them out of the building, they're not prepared for it. We just opened our own burn building, our own training facility that in our department, and being one of the chiefs that was tasked with help creating the SOP for that burn building, I know our board wanted us to follow 1403 almost to the letter, and it was very difficult, especially with the number of instructors I have to have present for a burn, and the safety officers and the safety lines and everything. And I think that after we have 3 or 4 burns under our collar, I think everybody is seeing now that, you know what, this is a little crazy. If we might be able to loosen up on that and have less personnel there and accomplish the same goal just as safely. And I think the fact of that, we're only allowed to burn hay and pallets, I think that specifically you're going to see change in the next few years.
Yeah, but the risk, right? So we run the risk, and I think we're all saying the same thing. We're afraid to say it. When the standard does change, we're going to have somebody get killed again in training, right? That we're going to do something.
Joe Starnes said it the best. We have to go in as professionals, and no matter what that standard says, doesn't mean that we leave our head in the truck. We have to think, whether it's training, whether it's a BS call, or whether it's coming out square on 3 windows, we still have to think on every call.
Yep, no, I agree. Shane, go ahead. You had some great comments that everybody stole from you, but go ahead. Throw it out there.
That's no problem. I'm just glad that I found people who also sharing my belief. I fight less fire than I fight closed minds in the profession anymore, and it's good to be amongst other people who get what I'm trying to say. A couple of things I just want to talk about is that the problem with the NFPA is not so much that they're trying to create, in my mind, is that they're trying to create a minimum standard, which we absolutely need. I've seen departments that ignore even the minimum standards and the issues that arise from that situation. But the problem with the NFPA is, as Robert just alluded to, following it to the letter is very hard. The Department of Defense has a very large operating budget for their fire service because they adopted the 1500 years ago, and in order to maintain that compliance with the 1500, we have to spend inordinate amounts of money, and it's not cheap. And for the fire departments, for departments like Adams that are living on a shoestring budget, it's about, unfortunately, you're probably in a demographic where you're never going to have the money. But for the other departments, it's about public education. You have to be getting out and telling the people why the department needs the money, and that it's not just so you can buy better recliners and that you can have nicer access to crash the grandmother's grand piano with. That there is legitimate need for the safety of the firefighters first in order to make life safer for the people at the end. And it's a hard sell, but the best thing you can do is be opening doors to your department, inviting people in, showing them that you're not sitting on the couch all day long, and that your best interest is with the department. One of the dichotomies to the fire service is that the better we are at educating people, the slower we are, and people don't understand that we are doing our job when we're not doing our job that way. So just keep fighting the good fight. But the NFPA, they've got a tough job. I don't always agree with everything they do, but the minimum standards are a requirement. They're necessary. I've seen too many times where they were ignored, and it's bitten people.
Yep. No, I agree. You cannot ignore them. Warren, go ahead. Put the ribbons on this just before we close it down.
All right. Good discussion. I'll reiterate what you said. NFPA in general, the standards are worth following, but they are a minimum. And to avoid getting in too much trouble with the lawyers, it's a good. They do have good things that keep us safe. There just need to be changes to allow us to train more realistically and perform in a more safe environment on the fire ground based on knowledge and training.
Right. And just one other comment, John wants to reiterate just a comment from the viewer. I think Joe hit the nail on the head. It's up to the chiefs to raise the bar. So, the responsibility of the chief to set the standard. And my only comment as I leave is, again, I think NFPA has to be listened to. I think they are the quote-unquote standard of care that is out there, if you will, as they say in the medical field. But I want to lean on something. We've talked about the chiefs. We've talked about the young firefighters. We've talked about all of them. Listen, the responsibility of the fire instructor in front of those students is going to make all the difference in the world. The responsibility of that instructor and the way he pitches it. We talk about what we see on the internet and whatever. 3 of us could put up an internet video right now, and we could all take a different slant on this, and we could all pitch it our own way. So I think the responsibility of a knowledgeable, current, relevant fire instructor who shares the knowledge, skills, and abilities that they have, and if those are valid. I've got a podcast coming out next week where I talk about, I thought the greatest book in the world in 1973 was Report from Engine Company 82. We probably shouldn't be doing things like that anymore. So although it's great and it is a piece of our culture, I think, and I don't want to abandon the culture, but I think we need to be relevant and current. And I place the responsibility on the instructor, because I think it's your responsibility. Those students, you're putting their thumbprints on those students, and I think that's a big deal. But I'm an instructor kind of guy. That's where I come from. So I think that's important. I think that's good stuff. We'll take one more comment from John, and that's where we'll leave it. John, you get the last word. Nice comment. We always have to be thinking as instructors if we expect to produce thinking firefighters. So that's just kind of a summary statement. So we'll see you again next week. Next week we have a special presentation of Firefighting Today. We may limit the panel. I'm not sure what we're going to do, but we have Greg is going to do a case history on a very difficult run he had. So I ask you to join us next week, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Join us right here, and we'll talk to you again next week. So let's cancel the broadcast right now. Good night, all. Be safe.